Our next speaker, it's Agustín Bethencourt. I hope I...
Benito, yes.
Yeah, Benito Bethencourt, from the Eclipse Foundation. And he will explain us why open source is not enough and what are the other aspects to take in consideration, like aspects like provenance, open governance, and the vendor neutrality. So welcome on stage, Agustín, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, welcome and thank you for being here. This is a clicker, correct? Yes. Oops. I would like to say thank you to the organizers and to the content committee for accepting the talk and having me here. And, you know, as a sponsors, we think the event is cool, so we want to support it. All right, so my name is Agustín Benito, and I've been around open source for some years now. And the aspect that I think is relevant for this talk is that I have worked either as employee, manager, or even executive, or as a member representative in quite a few foundations by now. So this is a little bit about some experience in nurturing, hosting, nurturing, and promoting open source projects. So let's see if you like it or if there is some controversy, which is always good. So the idea here is Eclipse Foundation is a, let's say, multi-project ecosystem. Yeah, it's a kind of organization that hosts and nurture projects, right, and build ecosystems around those community projects. So what I'm trying the takeaway of this talk is, please consider this kind of organizations, Eclipse Foundation or any other of these kind of organizations, when you are starting an open source project or when you are through your project lifetime journey and you find yourself in that stage in which you need to create a legal entity. And that moment, especially when you get there, you need to create a legal entity for whatever reason. You know, it doesn't matter. You need to manage some money for the event, or you start having discussions about the branding because you have somebody stealing your intellectual property for whatever reason. That's a very relevant moment, and usually most people take most of the decisions around that time based on convenience, and that's absolutely fine. We've all been there. I just want to tell you that there are plenty of other variables that you need to consider when you get into that moment, and I'm going to talk about some that are not very obvious or some that has importance in stages that are far away from that moment, right? I always recommend when you get into that point, I'm starting an open source project or I'm thinking about a legal entity, to put yourself in the shoes of your target audience. And the target audience usually is those who you want to attract to invest, either money, time, whatever, and your potential users, right? We know that considering that if you increase the user base, you are somehow increasing your chances to get more contributors. Put yourself in their shoes. And when you do, and you are old enough and you have been around some time, there used to be a time in which it was basically all about the license, right? So you need to learn about the licenses, and you were almost kind of done. Open source grew and grew in importance, and then it was all about community. You start open source projects that are not just a group of guys. You start to have actually real communities, and in order to understand where to put your effort, do I consume this software or this other, do I invest in this community or in this other, you needed to actually go deep and try to learn about community, about the healthiness of that community, not just to reduce risk, but for many other reasons. Over time, open source got very relevant in many markets, right? Commercially, it's a success. So then the landscape got even more complicated, and then you start to look at, you needed to look at what are the business models behind the organizations that are supporting those projects, in addition to everything else, right? So when you put yourself in the shoes of your target audience, there was a lot of things that they need to consider. Right? So, and things are getting even worse nowadays. In the last 2-3 years, things are getting even more complicated. Now, in some cases, you even need to go as far as the investors that are behind those companies that are driving or actively participating in the open source project in order to understand what are you getting into. It's becoming really complicated to the point that for those who are your target audience, especially if they are not saving in open source, everything is gray. And it's not black and white anymore. It's getting even worse over time. So one of the points that I'm trying to make is that when you get to that point in which you're thinking about creating a legal entity, or you're even thinking about creating a project that will have a commercial impact, or you do it with commercial impact in mind, you need to understand that the license is absolutely relevant, but there is way more that you need to consider. And the target audience needs to consider that, and for them it's not a clear landscape. So my first takeaway to all you guys is think about making things clearer. Go against the trend. Try to simplify things for those who you are trying to target, because it's getting more and more complicated. And so what are the options I have, right? That's always a relevant question. And to me, if I have to think about one concept that should drive those decisions, is sustainability. Of course, there might be others, right? When you are starting a project, or when you are reaching that critical point of creating a legal entity, there are some practicalities that you need to address, right? But if you make that exercise of putting yourself in your target audience shoes, you soon realize that sustainability is it should be an essential argument for all the decisions you are about to take. And I'm going to talk about certain aspects that hits directly this point, 3 or 4 in basically 6 minutes, so obviously it won't be in detail. The first one is provenance. When you're starting a project, when you are getting into creating your own legal entity, you never think about the death of your project, but you're creating technology. Technology grows, it gets to a mature point, and it dies. And you have to think about the life cycle of your project, and the death part is a very important one. Because, sometimes the technology dies, and sometimes the project dies with the technology. Sometimes the technology dies, and the project doesn't have to die with the technology. But it's an important moment. It's a moment that can define, that can drive a lot of frustration, that can hit your reputation, that can damage a lot of the assets that you have been creating for years. It's an important point. You have to consider it. So it's this idea of this, the best cultures are the ones that take care of the elderly. It's an analogy that I always like to think about. Yeah? You have to take care of that code that you are not in active development anymore, but some might be using. Or you need to have this as a concept of archiving a project because they are not active contribution anymore, still making available. Who knows, maybe somebody wants to pick it up in some years, and maybe not. Maybe just you leave it there available for your downstream. So it's an important concept that you have to think about. The other one is open governance. Nobody wants to write processes, especially when you are in the incipient state of your project. Your engineers do not want to start writing how they behave, how they take the decisions, right? Why? Why should I do that? It's an open source project. We are behaving. We trust each other. The truth is that open governance is essential when things go wrong. When you get into a crisis, and every single open source project get into crisis at some point. And if you don't have well established your processes, how you take decisions, if you don't have a culture of respecting what is written, when crisis hits you, it might turn down your entire assets. It might turn down your entire even community. You can break the trust. It's essential to write down those processes. It's essential to respect them. It's essential to be true to the open governance model. One more that it's not necessary, but it's very, very important, is vendor neutrality. There are plenty of open source projects out there that are extremely successful, that are single company driven or single organization driven. It's not about success. You don't need vendor neutrality to be successful. But if you want to be resilient, if you want to increase the resilience of your project, vendor neutrality is one of the best ways to achieve it. It is not just to attract more corporations, why vendor neutrality is important. It's to be resilient at every level. We are not talking only at business level. We are talking also about technical level. Having most of your developers affiliated to a single company, that's a risk. Having most of your marketing people or your document people is a risk. Having most of your tools hosted at in a very specific place, that's a risk. And open source project that has been around 25 or 30 years, I'm proudly member of one of them, like KDE, we know that as a fact. We decided at some point to move away, for example, from GitHub, when GitHub was by far the best option for our developers. We did it because vendor neutrality was relevant for us. And I'm just talking about one example, right? That's important for sustainability. And then there are organizations out there that are building ecosystems for years. And when you are starting a company, when you are starting, especially when you think about legal entity, a legal entity is something that you need to feed. It's a hungry beast. And you cannot think small when you are talking about creating a legal entity. You have to think big. You need money. You need effort to get money. You need people to put effort to get money. And you need senior people in some cases, or people that are very talented to do that. So it is like in the technical field, right? Sharing knowledge is important, making agreements is important, sharing effort is important. It's the same at product level, it's the same at business level. These organizations that host many, many projects, some of them has built ecosystems for years that are, de facto has become very good business developer environments. It was not the intention. It is still not the intention. We are code-first organizations. But because of building relations with engineers, working for companies, because having our software being used commercially, we have had, as a side asset, built these kind of ecosystems that are that lower the activation energy significantly for newcomers. And that's a very, very, very valuable asset. So there are plenty of organizations you can look at, and with different models, and each one of them has their value. That's why they are surviving, that's why they are mature today, and that's why in some cases they are extremely successful. So take some time to look at all of them. I'm going to talk for 1 minute about one of them, the one I'm currently working on. But again, this is a lot of what you're going to hear is not specific to us, right? So Eclipse Foundation is a European foundation, right? We moved to Europe 3 years ago, and now the matrix is in Europe. Our memberships are in Europe. But it's a global. We have global reach. That is not a relevant factor in many cases. Hopefully it will be more relevant over time because, we will create an environment that respects data significantly more than today, that, use federated approaches to, again, centralized technologies. But today it doesn't seem to be a relevant factor, except for some cases, right? And we are, for us, those cases are very relevant, right? And most of our memberships are European anyway. So we have get enough critical mass already to become a real support for new projects, for new organizations that are getting into open source. We are big enough now, and we have been enough time around to have gone through a lot. And I think that's valuable. That's valuable for newcomers. And we have a fairly good impact. So, and that's essential to get users, that's essential to get contributors, and that's essential for driving your technologies into commercial success. Again, it reduces significantly your activation energy. And Eclipse Foundation, we are mostly known for our first project, Eclipse IDE. If you are into Java, we are well known there, but it's not the only things we do, right? We do a lot of other stuff nowadays. I work for this project called Oniro, which is in the IoT and Edge field. We have also automotive. We are into cloud. We are into open hardware, a lot of fields. And finally, We are community-driven, so we are not company-driven. We are community-driven, and we are proud of that. For us, it's code first. Without code, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. And finally, it's all about, that's something very unique to us, is that we work to make the open source developed by the contributors at Eclipse commercially successful. So we summarize that idea in a lot of activities we do in that front as we are commercial friendly. And that's basically it. Thank you.